Hey everyone, and welcome to the Psyched Practice Podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me is
Ray Christner.
And, we have a Living Psyched episode today, and it's a topic that I think has been floating around in a variety of our past episodes, but really wanting to take some time and kind of hone in and focus on it. And it's this idea of, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah, it's, I think, such a important topic. And, this is something that, I think I've always thought through, but, over the last, I'd say a few months, really been on my mind. And, I wrote a Psychology Today post about it as well. But, for me, it actually hit me one day where, and I shared this with you, Paul, but on my social media feed, this video pops up, it's funny because I'm not like a guy that flips through videos that much, but it came up and it was, it said, check in on those around you. So I clicked it and, essentially it's this video that's, put on by the Norwich City Football Club, which is a soccer team, over in Europe. And they basically, it's these two guys that are sitting watching soccer games together. And as they're watching the games, the one guy's just not reacting, essentially. And throughout the video, the other guy's just standing up, he's cheering. And it's little snippets of them over several games. And then, you get toward the end and then it's just the one guy that comes to the game and you can tell he's grieving and he puts the other guy's towel over his seat and, indicating that this person took his life. And the thing that was striking in it was the guy that we didn't expect. The guy that was sullen throughout the other videos is the guy there, and the guy that looked happy, was not. And, it's such a great video. And I think we could post a link to this.
Yeah, no, it'll be in our show notes. So if you're interested in watching and not familiar with it, head down and click on the link.
Yeah. I mean, it's just just a great video. And, so from that, it kind of, for me, I was like, gosh, we need to talk more about this. And, it got my head spinning in a whole bunch of ways, but, one of it was about celebrities and, all these celebrity suicides that we see. And, how many times do we see a news story and it's like, oh gosh, we're just so shocked. We're surprised by this. And, so I think it's a great topic to kind of dive into because it really shows how much more work we need to do.
And, this pressure of like masking. And I think, we even called it out back in, if not our first, one of our first practice and action episodes where we're talking about words matter and what words we use. And, I think one of the examples was asking that question of like, hey, how are you doing? And
I'm okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And we don't really expect a different answer. And, I think, Ray and I were, we're kind of in a different setting where maybe we get, a bit more of an honest reflection more often, but certainly, out in just kind of a daily life capacity. I don't know that I hear anything other than I'm okay, unless it's with my very, very close loved ones. And, I'm very thankful and honored that they can go there with me and I can go there with them. But I don't know that that's always the case for all individuals, and it can be really isolating.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've thought about this a lot, even myself, how much I've done it where, someone, a friend or somebody would say, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm great. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm whatever we're saying. And, there are a lot of days I wasn't, and maybe it was just a bad day at work, whatever it was. But, I didn't go, you know what, today kind of sucked. It was a really rough day. And so, I think just that whole little exchange, it's got me thinking like, how do we do better? How do we really, and I'm not saying we shouldn't ask, hey, how are you okay? Or how are you doing? I think that's, it's something we do, but there are a lot of people in our lives that maybe asking different questions might be important.
And I think one thing is making sure that we almost give this presence that, we allow them to be not okay. And that,
Sure.
we have the capacity to hear that, because I think so often one of those initial perceptions is, I don't want to bother you. I don't want to be a burden. I don't even know how I'm feeling. So me trying to sit down and work through and share what I'm going through, not worth the time. And so we can just kind of easy button it, and say, oh, I'm okay. How are you? And then we move on, and we're able to kind of get off, on a different topic. And, I think sometimes that, getting off on a different topic actually can be helpful. But the value of kind of doing it intentionally and there being a shared recognition that that's what's happening versus, okay, now I'm masking and now I'm trying to, give this perception, and, really on the inside, it's just not congruent.
And it's, the article I wrote, one of the things I focused on was this idea of dissonance, that, we do have this societal pressure to come across as life being okay. Not only in those little exchanges, but even with social media, most people are posting good things. They're smiling. They're different places. Very few people are posting, hey, I wish I really had somebody to talk to right now. I mean, I think that does exist. I think that's out there. But sometimes I worry that it gets out there when it's too late.
Yeah.
Versus us being able to have these authentic conversations earlier, and people being comfortable of having a balance of, we can be positive and we can also sometimes have a bad day. And, so I guess let's go back for a second, Paul. We were talking about the words. So what are your thoughts? How do we interact differently with people?
Yeah.
That would encourage, I don't know, maybe encourage isn't the word I want, but would provide a safe kind of space for them to say, hey, I am having a bad day. What's the language that you think of?
In part, it's language, and in part, it's paraverbals and nonverbals.
Sure.
I think about trying to make sure I have the capacity to hear this. And so if I'm rushing, in and out, or it's a brief exchange, recognizing that might not be the best space to go into it, but right. At the same time, not wanting to just fake it either. And so kind of giving this, that ability to say, hey, I'm, if things aren't great, I might not be able to focus right now, but I will find the time, or I will make the time. And I think really just kind of changing the tone. And so hey, how are you doing? Versus, if I'm kind of catching up with some friends that, I know that there's some heavy stuff going on, be like, hey, what's really going on? Not the things are good kind of conversation, but what's actually going on for you? And if it is things are good because they are legitimately good, but oftentimes it creates this dialogue where we get to just kind of go in and, we kind of talk about some of the harder stuff, or some of the stuff that's been this fucking sucks. And being able to just kind of have that, that tone. And so kind of calling out and disrupting a bit of the norm, and just not saying, hey, how are you doing? But, how are you really doing? Or, okay, yeah, but what's actually going on? Of just double checking and giving a bit of a pause, because I think that disruption opens up a bit of that, oh, we're not used to that. We then become a bit more present, and then in being more present, can we be a bit more genuine?
Yeah, I it's interesting, because I think I've come down to maybe it's not as much the words. How are you doing is maybe not the wrong phrase, but saying, hey, Paul, how are you doing is different than, man, Paul, been thinking about you. Just that different tone, those pauses, those little things create maybe a little different place, and the other thing I think it's interesting is, as I've kind of thought much more purposefully about this, I've even changed sometimes, especially with people that it's not just in passing, but friends, to even almost disclose a little bit, to create it, to say, man, I've had a really rough week this week. It's this one's been a tough one. What's your week been like? And it's interesting because I think that just that simple, hey, it's okay if we talk about not just the good stuff, it opens it up. And sometimes it's just a very simple conversation. But I will say, since I've done it, I've had several people to go, oh man, you just can't even imagine what's going on in my life. And, yeah, I can't. So, hey, listen, I'm here.
Yeah.
If you want to chat, like, I'm more than willing to take some time and listen. And I think you're right. We have to have the time for that. We have to make sure. And if not, I just had a friend of mine who we were talking on the phone and had a similar exchange. And she said, yeah, like life's really rough right now. And it wasn't a time that I could have the conversation, but I said, hey, listen, I'm here. Like, how about if I just call you later on? I'll be done. I can give you, a quick call. And just that piece. And I know just in our exchanges after how much it just took pressure off of her. It's so I think having that language and just changing our tone and maybe how we approach it, maybe will open up a better dialogue for people.
And another part of that, I think, is if we don't feel okay, but we don't know why, really trying to challenge that expectation of like, okay, hey, if I'm going to share it, I need to have, my notes ready and be able to, lay it all out there.
Right.
And I think there's value in sometimes like being able, whether, we're modeling it or if we're going for actual support, being able to share like, I've just not really been feeling, I don't really know why. It's just I've been feeling off and, I'm hoping it changes, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And being able to let there be that genuineness there that says, hey, to not be okay doesn't need, we don't need to prepare, because going back, I think when people do put it out there in that way, it might feel too late, or, there's again, this pressure of, I think of signs I've seen on, back when I've worked retail and things of that, of like, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions.
Right.
And, that has a place at times, but, I don't know that that's the greatest when it comes to dealing with our emotions and dealing with like some life stressors or problems. And when we first start to seek support for it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that it's I think with it, even if we catch it before it gets to that point of being overwhelming. So, I mean, maybe when we're in that phase where we just don't know, like, and we're in that, maybe just knowing, hey, this is a person, I can call Paul if I need to, talk to somebody further. It opens a different door of dialogue.
And along those lines, I think there's so much value also in not trying to rush to comfort. And, I think that's our initial response. And no, I think it's well-meaning, who doesn't want to try to provide comfort, but when hard things happen, when we have these uncomfortable emotions, they're meant to be uncomfortable. And maybe we can help alleviate that. But I don't know that that's always the intention or the role. Sometimes kind of hearing and experiencing what that's meant to feel like or what that's meant to be like. And so, I know that we've been talking about some heavier topics here recently, on our podcast or, in interviews elsewhere. And that's a theme that I noticed where it's like this, hey, isn't meant to be comfortable. And right. So, let's not try to rush through it, or let's not try to put wrap it up in a nice bow. And it's messy. It sucks, and let it suck. And we don't need to have the answers, nor do we need to know what the problem is.
Yeah. I think that, that's a great point, because I think one of the things we need to not do is to try to give solutions.
Yeah.
And not have answers. And sometimes I think just being there is important. And, I always wonder, like, when if somebody comes to us and, they're like, gosh, I've been really depressed. And this is not in a therapy role, like just in a personal life. Mm-hmm. And somebody says to them, hey, well, just do this. And they give them a solution. It's, hey, but just get up and make sure you're thinking positive things, or go for a run, or whatever it is. And then the person tries it and it doesn't work. Like, do we set that person up then to not not ask again or not say again because they don't want advice. And, I've had to, being someone who listens to people pretty much all day and working with people to find solutions many times, I have to change that role in my personal life. And sometimes that's hard to do. But, I've had friends who have come and I think they think I'm going to be a psychologist and I'm not, like in that role with them where, it might just be us sitting and listening and not even talking and going like, dude, like, I get it. This is tough. And I'm here. I'm going to listen. I'm going to do what I need to, but not rushing to want to take their pain away. And it's uncomfortable. I mean, it's uncomfortable, I think, for everybody. For me, it definitely is, because I want to say, hey, let's talk about this strategy you can do. And there's a time and a place for that. Yeah. But I think more people would be open, and I think in a healthier way, if we just let them be with their emotions and we can be with them with their emotions.
And, I think this, like, we're in the context we're talking about it, it's kind of more social relationships, but I think this is such an important role, even in family dynamics as well. And, sure. A number of times I'm working with, a adolescent client or a teenage client, and, their parent meaning well is kind of trying to take on too solution focused of a role, and right. Not just being able to be that empathetic support that says, hey, the fact that, school is really struggling right now, and you are playing a role. You're not making it easier on yourself by, not doing your homework or whatever that maybe is, but me harping on you at this point and offering, well, if you would just do your homework, if you would just right. do whatever, like, isn't necessarily going to be right. the best response in that moment, and letting there be that space for discomfort, because again, I think the push for solution at times diminishes the sharing. And if we diminish the sharing too much, then we're cutting off very valuable bridges there.
Yeah. It's interesting, because I think it is definitely when you talk about this, and you think of, so we're saying part of the solution is to let yourself feel shitty, and to acknowledge it and to be with it for a moment, and maybe ourselves not trying to fix it. Like it is okay to feel depressed sometimes, and it's okay to grieve sometimes. It's, and we don't want to live in that space too long, but I think also sometimes we got to realize those are natural emotions, and that doesn't mean we just stay there. But, I think sometimes even, as a therapist, I think sometimes my most therapeutic moves is, gosh, this really sucks. Like, let's just be there for a moment. Like, let's be present with that fact. And we're eventually going to get to how to get out of it, but we don't have to rush it, because I think sometimes when we, was it Ben Franklin, haste makes waste? Sometimes when we rush to solutions, we come to the wrong solutions, and we're just trying to take something away. Maybe if we just stay there for a second, it also lets us, make the right choices. I've had so many people professionally, and I think probably personally as well, that the more they try that doesn't work, the deeper it digs them to think that it's hopeless. Yeah. Rather than saying, okay, I don't know right now. I don't know the solution. We're going to stay here for a second. We're going to think it through. We're going to be thoughtful. We're going to be intentional, whatever word we want to use. Yeah. And that doesn't mean they're going to work. I think they're still, we know that's going to happen, but it's done in a way where it's not trying 10 things in 24 hours and all 10 things fail. And then all of a sudden we go, oh, life really does suck. Like, there's no way out of this.
Yeah. And significance of feeling heard as well really comes to mind. And, as you were sitting there talking about like how, at times most therapeutic action is no action. And I can't count the number of times when I've talked to individuals, as well as in my personal life, when, that just hearing them, and acknowledging it, and being able to say like, yeah, that's awful. That sucks. And they're like, right. Like it's kind of like that, like finally someone, someone's not just either brushing it off or telling me it'll get, hey, it'll get better, chin up, like that kind of like, again, pushing to comfort, or, to solution folk, like, hey, have you tried doing this? It's like, nah, get there, but that's not what I'm looking for right now. I just want someone to kind of recognize and almost the act of validation. And if we really kind of break down, validation is just like necessarily have this, but I think it gives permission to feel those emotions and feelings and not feel a sense of shame or stigma about it.
Yeah. It's, I look at my own personal life. My, probably the person that's impacted my life the most was my grandmother. And it was, interesting. She very kind of simple person, was, not educated, but was a person that just knew how to listen. Like, and as a teenager, when things were just not going well, I'd go to her house and I'd sit there and always felt better. Like it was always she was the person that could take something and make it better. And, over my life, especially as I started then getting into psychology, and I always say like, probably learned more skills from her than I actually did any classes that I took. Shouldn't say that out loud, but it does, sometimes it does feel like that, but it was interesting because in hindsight, she actually never did anything. Yeah. I mean, but she would listen, and I know there were moments that I would ramble and probably be on who knows what kind of a tirade, because I was going through whatever, and being a teenager, and she was just there. She never gave solutions, never tried to, but it was very validating. And she would just say like, yeah, I get it. Like, you know what, we're going to find a way where you're going to get us. Just not do it now. And then we would talk, and before you know it, like I said, I felt better. And so such a good strategy.
And, I know that with this being our living psyched, I don't want it to get too clinical, but I can't stop but think about how so much of this emulates person-centered therapy. And,
Sure.
What Carl Rogers was putting out there, and especially that piece of, and I recognize, this is not appropriate for all individuals or all circumstances. But as you're talking about in those teenage years, having someone that had this unconditional positive regard that shared and reflected with you authentically and genuinely helped to lead you into, bettering yourself and working to resolve the circumstances. And, And so I think at times that can be so effective, and yet we can be afraid to do that.
Yeah. And I like that, the reference to person-centered therapy. And, it's that those skills, I think that's what's really most important in most of these cases, because it's, how these people that, the people that we're talking about that are in this dissonance where they're feeling one way and they're presenting another way. Those are the skills that are going to then lead them to get support. And, likely they're not just going to go to therapy right away. And, it's, they may feel trapped that they can't show that. So I think, simple things, active listening, not trying to solve the problem immediately, taking time and just saying, hey, I'm here. What do you need from me? I think you gave a good example, earlier when we were talking and, about choices. Yeah. I think that's maybe share that, because I think it's a great kind of way to think this through.
And I don't quite recall where I first heard it, if it was a class or a textbook or, just supervision at one point, but being the value of providing choices for individuals, because so often it's like, hey, how can I help? Idea, like, that's way too open-ended. But being able to offer it in choices in terms of, hey, do you need space? Do you want to be distracted? Or do you want to talk? And if you do want to talk, do you want me to just listen and validate what's going on? or do you want to try to, problem solve and, look for, have more of that solution focus? And, kind of, do you want my opinion, or do you want me, want me to throw in my insight, or do you want me to just kind of sit back and, just listen? Because sometimes I think we can overly jump to that, just being able to, pushing to solve it because it's uncomfy.
Yeah. I mean, that's such valuable information that, gosh, it's helpful in therapy, but I think it's, helpful in just everyday life. And we all make mistakes. I mean, there are times that, there are moments with my wife where I go, I wish I'd have taken that one back. Like, I wish I would have just said, hey, like, is this you want me to help with this, or is this you want me to listen to it? Probably could have been better if I would have asked that question ahead of time. And I think I like that. And maybe that's the great takeaway from this episode, is that when we have individuals we're worried about, maybe asking the right or different question. Yeah. And then when they're open about it, maybe just saying, hey, what can I do? And here are some options. Would you like me to listen? Would you like me to help problem solve? And giving them those choices, because you're right. I think the open-ended, how can I help you? I don't know, when I'm in a place where my mood's not great, I don't know that I know that answer.
Prefrontal cortex is not it's not firing.
That's right.
And I can speak personally, and I think even within the past, at least in the last 2 weeks, I know this is something that has come up between my wife and I, and she was frustrated about something, and I felt myself starting to edge towards like, well, hey, have you tried? And pulling back, and at times I think it can be uncomfortable to ask, but I don't know if you want me to just listen, or you don't know if you want me to throw out a solution here. What would feel better? And it made a world of difference, because she then had a voice in that, and I think it also let her know that I'm attentive enough and hearing her enough that I can just, discriminate between the two, and not just kind of falling into a pattern that it's like, yeah, no, that's not what I'm looking for. And I think everyone's been there in a certain point where getting unsolicited advice that, if we even try it, we're doing it half-heartedly. And I think the value of also, and I do really want to kind of emphasize, not staying stuck there too long. And I do think that there's a number of individuals, even in my personal life, who we may be validating every time, and it's okay. We can talk about that too. And so being genuine, I think, is another piece, and being able to share like, hey, we keep having these conversations, and like, I don't know if this is helping. And, it just puts it back and has them thinking, and it's not trying to do it out of shame or, stigmatizing it. But, if we have that genuine concern and says, hey, I want you to feel heard, but I also don't want you, I want you to feel like you have to stay here either. And I think that's the nice balance of these questions, is it, gives us an opportunity not only to ask, but to also, give our feedback as well. And one other piece, and you mentioned it, but I guess I want to really put it out there directly. I think the value and power of just silence and being present, because I think at times we rush to find the right thing to say when, saying nothing is the right thing, and just letting the heavy moments be. And so, I think that has immense value. And I can recall even my grad program being practicing sitting in silence and sitting in that discomfort. And it can make a world of difference to not feel rushed into finding the words, or, and that in itself can just be a form of support.
And I think sometimes with the idea of being present, presence can be more powerful than words. Yeah. And so it really, in these circumstances and these kind of situations, it really isn't what we say, but the fact that we're there with someone, that's what I think people will perceive as caring. That's what, that's the connection that we're going to make. And, I think we've used the word, kind of the safe space kind of talk, but where people won't feel judged when we don't say anything. And And silence doesn't mean you're uncomfortable. It's again, sometimes a good sense of support.
Absolutely.
I think going back to the intro as we're kind of wrapping up here is sometimes we are going to worry about people in our life. And, when that happens, we got to make sure we have good resources for them. And so I just want to take a moment and shout out just the idea of calling the 988 number, which for those who are not aware is a crisis line that can be called for mental health concerns, or also the crisis text line. And that is just texting the word home to 741714. And that will actually engage into a text interaction with trained individuals. And because sometimes when we ask these questions, maybe we're not going to get the answers we want. Yeah. And for those who aren't comfortable with it, making sure we give people those resources if we are worried about them.
And, I think those are invaluable resources. And, I think reaching out to those individuals that are closest to us and, if we don't feel comfortable going to them, having them, being able to have someone to go to is just such a positive thing. And, and I think my typical, pullback is, we hope you enjoy this episode, but it's okay if you didn't, So, but we'll be back in 2 weeks. But until then, be well and stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.